And welcome back to the final chapter of Henry Barrie, Vimy Ridge Survivor. It's been very much my pleasure to read through this book with you, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. On May 1st, 1947, the following article appeared in the Perth Courier: Watson's Corners, Mr. and Mrs. Henry Barrie, honored by friends. About 80 neighbors and associate members of the Zion Church gathered at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Barrie on Thursday night to shower them with good wishes before they moved to their new home near Perth. Cards and dancing were enjoyed by the younger people, while the older ones enjoyed a social visit. During the evening, Mr. and Mrs. Barrie were asked to come to the center of the room, and following speech was made by Mr. Lorne Gemmell. We sincerely regret your departure from Watson's Corners, but realize that our loss will be another's gain. During the years with us, you have always taken a keen interest and an active part in any worthwhile activities, both in church and community, and as neighbors, we're always willing to give a helping hand. As a valued member of the session, you, Henry, have shown an example of energetic Christian life, and you have made both very effective contributions toward furthering God's purpose. A wide knowledge of most affairs, a clean perception of what is just and good, and a friendly interest in the various problems that confront a community have endeared you to us. May you have pleasant memories of Watson's Corners, and we all wish you health, happiness, and prosperity in your new home. A large living room mirror, Chesterfield table, and smoker stand were presented. Henry made a suitable reply, and all joined in singing, for they are jolly good fellows. Henry, Nettie, Gordon, and Ralph all moved to the new farm in Drummond Township the following week, just down the road from the Davidson farm. Evelyn and Eva had already married and had their own families in the local area. After Henry's service, they were able to sell their existing farm for $1,500 and bought this new farm for $4,000. The new farm had an existing dairy operation with 100 acres of prime cropland and a large two-story stone home built at the turn of the century. Nettie now had a parlor, full kitchen, bedrooms for all, and a beautiful view of the fields. Henry got his final adventure. With the help of his son, Ralph, and his family, Henry set out with expanding the farm. With his knowledge of construction, Henry and Ralph added to the existing barn and house with a storage building and chicken coop. Henry started planting crops for the first time in his life, and learned about irrigation, tiled plains, plowing, and a full dairy operation. It was during this time that Henry got his first tractor and started collecting the crop implements that were needed. With the rich, fertile soil of his new farm, Henry was able to build fences for the cows and stop building the cedar rail fences so common in the Atlantic Highlands. Henry and Ralph learned about the importance of rotating crops and planted corn, soybeans, and alfalfa, with a portion of the land in pasture for the other portion. With years passing, Henry and later Ralph became well-known farmers in Drummond Township, and Ralph eventually became the president of the local Ontario Farmers Association and was known as an honest and trustworthy person. At the height of their operation, they had multiple chickens and turkeys, a large dairy operation, and field crops as well. With the wealth of knowledge between construction, fencing, dairy, poultry, goats, horses, crops, and syrup making, Henry became a valuable resource to anyone in the area who needed a hand. He spent his entire life speaking without profanity and always treating everyone he met with respect. And if you asked, he would gladly share his faith in God. However, the one thing he would not talk about was experiences in the war. Gordon went on to become a police officer in Toronto, showing the same sense of adventure and desire to serve others for God's glory. While he never had to experience witnessing the death of someone, he did share that he came close. In my 27 years in the force, I never had to shoot anyone. The closest I ever came was when I was on the SWAT team. We had a report of gunshots at a residence. When we got there, we saw a man run into his house, quietly closing the door behind him. My partner came through the front when I went around the back. I could see in his basement through a window and saw him hold a revolver to his head, and my partner pointed the rifle at him. I lined up the shot, but then I felt the presence of God at that moment. I could tell he was saying, "Don't take the shot." I had every justification to do it, but I lowered my rifle. We got him to put the gun down and arrested him with incident. We found out later his family was sleeping upstairs, including his little daughter. To this day, I am so thankful God told me not to take that shot. Gordon shared one more story about his father. My father never really retired. He worked that dairy farm with Ralph right up until the day he died. He and Mother took one vacation their entire lives. When Dad was 62, he and Mother took a trip to Florida and played tourist for a week. He seemed to enjoy the plane ride more than anything else. He had never been on a plane before. When he got back, he talked about the rush of the plane when it took off and how quickly they got up in the air and how small everything got. He also talked about how the clouds stopped and they were flying above the clouds. Finally, the landing was also exciting, bumping on the runway and suddenly stopping. It was one of the few times he talked about the war with me. I finally understand why those flyboys loved it so much. I can now imagine what a rush it would be with the wind blowing through your hair and ground rapidly disappearing and coming back. It would be like sitting on a big cedar as it was coming down. You would really need to have some nerve to choose that line of work. He also enjoyed the big fair in Florida and the different gardens and trees. He couldn't believe how large the vegetables got and the amount of water they had. Mom said, though, when they got to the ocean at Miami, Dad got quiet again and started smoking a cigarette. I suspect he was thinking about the boat ride over the ocean with Jimmy and returning without him. I wish he could have had more of a retirement, but whether it was the lifetime of smoking or being gassed, he died at the age of 64, the day before Christmas. He started going downhill for several years, but the week before, he suddenly started having major issues with his breathing. They tried to operate on that spot in his lungs in the Veterans Hospital in Ottawa, but he didn't make it. Henry's father died pretty early, but his mother lived longer than him. There is no doubt his war experience has shortened his life. He started smoking then, and everything he went through took a toll. However, it never really changed him. He taught us that God will always watch out for us. It was because of the way that he was always willing to sacrifice himself for others that we really understood just how great God's love is for us. He always used to say, "It isn't about what you get now, it's about what you get later." Finally, Gordon also said, "The first time I read the diary, I was struck by the fact my father always ended the entries with, 'It was a fine day.' He always started our family prayers with, 'Our Father, thank you for this fine day.'" On December 26, 1959, Henry Gordon Barrie moved on to heaven from his residence on the 6th line of Drummond Township outside of Perth with his family around him. His diary and his testimony lives on. Note: the Battle of Vimy Ridge is now known as the event that brought Canada together as a country. Despite 9 failed previous attempts by other forces, the entire Canadian Expeditionary Force was brought together as one, led by General Julian Byng. It was the only time in the war that every single healthy Canadian soldier was with the rest of his countrymen. Interestingly, the battle was to begin on Sunday, April 9th, and the French asked for the battle to be delayed by a day so the war didn't serve as a backdrop to the local church's Easter worship service. As a result, according to the memoirs of Reverend William Davis, the chaplains spent the Sunday going from battalion to battalion celebrating Mass, Eucharist, and the Lord's Supper. The next day, after being reminded of the sacrifice Christ did for us, the Canadian Expeditionary Force paid the ultimate sacrifice for us and took the 3 trenches at Vimy Ridge, turning the tide of World War I. And finally, I've included within the book here is a couple maps just to give you a bit of a sense of where Watson's Corners is and where the 6th line of Drummond is. Watson's Corners is actually that little intersection right in there where Levant and Dalhousie, Darling and Lanark all kind of come together and meet. Watson's Corners, sorry, I'm in the wrong spot. Watson's Corners is more in that line on that road right there, right where the dotted line crosses. And then the sixth line of Drummond is just a little bit further down, right down in that area there. So you can see that Henry moved from that area up there, basically down to that area there. Once you get on the other side of the Dalhousie Lake and the Mississippi River, the ground becomes much, much nicer and easier to work with. And so that concludes our book on Henry Barrie. It was certainly my pleasure to have the opportunity to meet with his grandson, Walter Gemmell, as well as his son, Gordon. Gordon is still living today just outside of Smith Falls, a very vibrant, very energetic, very strong in his Christian faith. I believe he would now be 98 years old and still going to the gym every single day. He is a big man. I can certainly understand why he was on the SWAT team and why he served on the Toronto Police Force. A very a man that really is inspiring if you ever get a chance to meet him. And you can see the influence that his father Henry would have had on him and just how inspiring all of these men were. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.